So these are just kind of guiding principles that help me start, work on, and finish any piece of work that I do. I got 2 or 3 pictures here. They're not flowers like the show, but I just wanted to show you that there are other things that I do. And these are 2 of my cats, and one of my big points in making this particular piece was the play of positive and negative. You've got 2 shapes, one positive, one negative. And hopefully they're both interesting shapes. I used to tell my students, if you draw a shape, you took scissors and cut it out of a piece of paper and held it up. Would it be an interesting shape? Hopefully, yes. Okay, this was a piece I did for an officer in the Oneida County Canine Sheriff's Department. And I had participated in a dog walk event to raise money for cancer, and sponsored by a dog trainer that I work with. I wanted to contribute something, so I said, well, sell tickets for $5 a piece, and whoever wins, I'll paint their dog for them. And this particular year, this police officer won, and this was his dog. I didn't want to just copy a photograph of the dog. I needed to do more, say more about the dog, have the dog, allow the dog to speak for himself to a degree. And hence I used the close-up and the more distant view with the sheriff's insignia in the background. The guy was thrilled with this painting. He loved it. This was another painting I did. I did 2 in a series. This is one of the 2 that I did, and I believe it hangs in the town hall in Remsen now, with a plaque underneath thanking the highway department people for their work. This was, I think the title of it was Christmas Day 2002, and this is what it was like that day, and the plows were out. And to do these paintings, I had to get some photo resources to work with. So I put on my coat and boots, and I hear the plow coming. I could hear it a mile away. Run out, stand in the middle of the road, camera in hand, ready to snap some pictures. There's a gradual hill that comes up, and this plow was just going to emerge up over the hill and get some pictures. And I'm sure the driver was saying, get out of the road. And when they got close enough, I'd jump out of the road and wave to them, and everybody was happy. But they were fun to do. I'd never done any kind of a mechanical thing before. The driver was a neighbor of mine. He loved it, so I gave him the other painting. So those are a few of the other things that I do. And this is a quote that I love. Painting is easy when you don't know how, but very difficult when you do. And I think there is a little truth to that. When you don't know how, you're brave enough to just kind of wade in and go at it. And sometimes your work then is better than after you think, oh, I should do this, or I should do that, or I gotta, and you get fussy, and sometimes you can ruin a painting by doing that. But this works. They're good words to keep in mind as an artist, no matter what stage you're at. Then the next one is that art is the unceasing effort. This applies more to my work here. The unceasing effort to compete with the beauty of flowers and never succeeding. Meaning that whether you are a painter or a photographer or a sculptor, you never can quite get up to the beauty of the real thing. However, people do it anyway. And I grow a lot of daylilies in my flower garden. I love them. But they, of course, daylilies, they only last one day. The advantage of trying to capture the beauty of the flower, even though you may fail, is that whatever you do get down on paper is there forever. It's not going to wilt. You're not going to have to water it. It's just there, and you have it forever. And, of course, you try your hardest to capture the light. And what always interested me was when the flower was backlit and the sun would shine through the petals, the translucence of the petals. To me, it was just so beautiful. And I could just sit and stare at them for hours. but I would take a picture. In my flower paintings, I primarily work from photo resources. And you have to be a little bit careful when you work from photo resources because it's very easy to fall into the trap of just copying the photograph. And that's a technician can do that. An artist goes beyond the photograph. It's still there, you still recognize it. It's still the subject matter, but it says more than the photograph. So you emphasize the lighting, you elaborate the colors, whatever you do. And it's also very, very important, how do you arrange the flowers on the page? Composition is my life force for a painting. You can be a very, very beginner painter, very rudimentary paint application skills. But if you have a good sense of composition, design, I use the two terms interchangeably. If you have a good composition, you can turn out a gorgeous painting, even though maybe you've only not painted since you were in 8th grade or you've never picked up a paintbrush before. It's all about design. And my tool, my best, I'm going to show you this, some of you will recognize this, is a viewfinder. And when you have a photograph, you don't want to copy the exact photo. What I do is take this viewfinder, which slides, you can do squares and rectangles, and you can adjust it, I'm sorry for my hand shakes, to capture whatever you want. And I take this, and I take my photograph, and I move this around the photograph until I find something that I think, there it is. That's it, right there. And I go ahead and paint it. But this eliminates all the other stuff, the leaves, the foliage, the trees, who knows what. And it also works for a plein air painter too, if you do plein air painting. When you go outdoors to paint, and Donna's into this with the mountain air painters and out of Old Forge, outdoors is just overwhelming for an artist. You go out and you think, oh my God, there is so much stuff around. What am I going to paint? And you might try to get too much in there and you end up with not a really good painting. If you take a viewfinder and you hold that up and you go around the scenery and you move it until sooner or later you're going to find not one, but probably a dozen beautiful paintings out of this mass of stuff that you're faced with. So if you are an artist, I would strongly encourage you to use a viewfinder if you don't already. These flowers, what I changed from the photograph, of course there was a ton of foliage, there was a lot of foliage and stuff in the background, but I didn't want a lot of competition with the blossoms. I wanted to focus on the blossoms. So I eliminated all these leaves and stuff in the background, other flowers further back, that sort of thing. And then when I was painting it, I had a much lighter background, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, it just didn't stir me at all, because it was same value. Value is a term having to do with light and dark in the painting, and the flowers are kind of mid-value, and the background was mid-value. So it all kind of ran together, nothing stood out. So I said, oh, what the heck, I picked up a brush, plopped it into the dark green or black or something, and started slathering it on, and all of a sudden it was like a painting came to life. It was like, oh, there they are. And that made the difference because there was a value contrast there that allowed you to separate the flower from the background. And that becomes your positive and negative, because the flowers are positive in the background by allowing the flowers to touch or almost touch the edge of the paper. You subdivide the background. So it isn't like you just paint a flower in the middle of nothing. So if you allow your subject, flowers or people or animals, whatever, architecture, to touch the edge of the paper, it helps you to divide the space on the paper. There's so many square inches on a sheet of paper. And the artist's first problem is, how are you going to divide those up? Are you just going, if you just draw a few things there, you haven't really dealt with the issue of space. You have to deal with the whole painting the dimensions, every square inch has to participate in some way in the painting. It either has to contribute to the center of interest or balance the center of interest. It has to participate in some way. Okay, and this is a George O'Keeffe quote. I have been accused of being a George O'Keeffe copier. I don't like to think of myself that way. I've always liked George O'Keeffe's work. I don't look at myself as trying to copy what she did. She says nobody sees a flower, really. It is so small, it takes time. Everybody's in a rush. Nobody has time to stop and look at, it's that stop and smell the roses thing. And to have a friend takes time. Well, in my paintings, anything I paint becomes a friend. Whether it's a person, an animal, a building, or a flower. In the end, I've become so well acquainted with it from painting it and thinking it through that it has become a friend. And even though Georgia says nobody has time, a few people do. Okay, and this one, I went from realism into the kind of semi-abstract, and this is one of the early ones that it's kind of a transition. There's enough here that's kind of realistic. You can say, oh yeah, I know what that is. But there's also other stuff that isn't realistic, that was put in for the sake of design. I got started doing this because years ago I went to a workshop with an artist by the name of John Salmon. He's in Duluth, Minnesota. He does incredibly detailed cityscapes, I guess you call them. He's just a magnificent painter, so I signed up for his workshop thinking I'd like to know how he does that. Well, I got to the workshop. That wasn't what we were going to do. We were going to do something totally different, which over the years since then, every year I appreciate more and more and more what he taught us. And even at the time, I was too busy following his little directions to really realize and put it all together what he was teaching us. And he was teaching us design. It was a course in design. If you ever get a chance to take a workshop with him, if you're an artist, do it. You will never regret it. Plus, he's a really good teacher. He's got a really sense of humor. So this was one of my first efforts here. And then the next one, that one is out there. And this one is kind of almost a semi-abstract because of the viewpoint. I didn't stand back and paint a yellow tulip on the page. I went right in, I call it the bee's eye view of the flower. And this is the only painting I've ever done that got in the AWS show. I don't know if you're familiar with American Watercolor Society. They have a big show in New York every year. I'm an associate member. I would love to be a signature member someday. You have to get 2 pieces in your shows to do that. I just like the painting, and again, it's the backlighting. You can see the shadow on the petals from the inner workings of the flower. And that isn't probably the primary thing that people would look at when they see the yellow tulip. They see the petals. So I wanted to tell them a little more, show them a little more, make them a little more curious of what's in there besides those yellow tulip petals. And this one I called Birds of a Feather because it made me think of the pink flamingos that you find on people's lawns. It was based on fuchsia blossoms. And the way I got to do these, going back to the John Salmon workshop, what he had us do, there were, I don't know, 50 of us or so, and he put a bunch of random objects in the middle of the table, had us sit all around the table, and do a blind contour drawing. Some of you may know what that is, but if you don't, it's you have your paper and you have the object, and you look at the object and you draw what you're seeing on the paper. And you can well imagine what happens with the lines. Sometimes you go off the paper or whatever. But you end up with drawings with interesting lines. So we'd have like 5 minutes to do that. Then we'd get up and move 2 or 3 seats over to get a different viewpoint. Do the same thing right over the first drawing. And then move again, third time, do a third drawing right over the first 2. And of course you ended up with this jumble on the page. It looked like mass chaos. You didn't see any objects, all you saw was a bunch of lines and shapes. And your job as an artist is to bring order out of chaos. And to me, when you paint realistically, you're kind of limited. When I do flowers, I'm not as limited as, say, a botanical artist. I took a couple classes in scientific illustration flowers, and it was too restricted. You had to know how many petals or how wide they were. I mean, it's very technical, and people do it beautifully, but that's their thing. They like that kind of thing. I didn't. I felt restricted. I wanted to be able to throw around color and exaggerate shapes if I felt like it. So I went beyond that, and it got to the realistic flowers. Well, then they became a little too restricting, and I wanted to do something different. And after I went to John's workshop on the way home, driving along, I'm thinking, gosh, I have all these drawings at home, because for all my realistic pictures, I did a big scale drawing. I would take my resource photo and my viewfinder and find it, and then I would do a scaled drawing from that. So, because I wanted to have a reasonably accurate drawing. So, so I had all these drawings at home, and I thought, why couldn't I do that with my drawings? So I did. When I got home, I started going through all my drawings, and I found 2 or 3 that I thought would layer together well, so I did. And that's how I ended up getting into these abstracts. So what you're seeing here is really 2 or 3 different drawings of fuchsias layered over each other, which makes this jumble of shapes, and it's up to you as the artist to bring some kind of order to this chaotic mess on the page. And the way to do that John taught us, and I tend to use, is by using value, lightness to darkness. And my painting, generally, there will be generally one area that is the lightest, and there will be other areas that are mid and other areas that are dark. And hopefully they all work together as a group or as a team to direct the viewer's eye through the painting. They should invite you into the painting. There should be something that invites you into the painting, and then something that guides you through the painting. I always used to tell my classes, as an artist, you're like a tour guide taking a group through an art museum, and you bring them into the painting, and you do this by using edges and contrast and texture and color and so forth. And you guide them through your painting, allowing them to slow down in some places, maybe to actually stop in some places, but then to move on to the rest of the painting. Maybe later go back and look at something again, just like you would at an art show or in a museum, so that the painting becomes an inviting, I guess you could call it a playground for the eye, that you could, they're fun to look at. And they're fun, with some of them, you can make out what the flower was that I used as a basis. Some of them, it's completely lost. That's as it should be. They're not supposed to be pictures of flowers. They're supposed to be beautiful collections of shapes based on flowers. And they're just fun to do. When I started doing them, I'd have a drawing, and I'd say, one shape, and I'd paint in one shape. I'll do one more. Well, 2 hours later, you're still painting. And then you go and eat supper and go to bed. Well, when I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is run right out there and look at what I did and see, do I like it? Do I not like it? What do I do next? What do I need to change, if anything? And continue working. And when you work on a painting, like any painting really, but paintings like my abstracts, each brush stroke that you put down is dependent on what's already there. Each brush stroke that you put down determines what you do next. Each brush stroke is important. It can make or break a painting. It can guide the viewer. Each brush stroke is important. You don't overlook anything. All right, this was another fuchsia painting, very different from the one you just saw. Perhaps a little more recognizable as fuchsias, and yet not realistic. It goes beyond realism. I love fuchsias because of those stamens, I guess I'm not a scientific person, that hang down, plus the colors are so pretty that I like that. And by overlapping them, I got lots of them. And this was a really fun painting to do. This is one of my favorites.
Martha, is it okay to ask you a question?
Sure.
When you started that painting, did you have a vision of what it would look like?
No.
No.
I had no idea.
One stroke at a time?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a good point, Donna. When you're facing this conglomeration of shapes on a page, you don't start out saying, oh, this is going to be that, or this is going to be that. You have no idea what it's going to be. It's going to become as you work. And it will kind of invent itself as you work. And you frequently should, I try to, stop and get back from the piece. I put it up on my bulletin board and step back. I can see it from the side, either side. I can see it from the front, up close, far back. I can see it with the lights turned on, with the lights turned off. And all those different conditions help you evaluate what you've done as far as design is concerned, and as far as the overall appearance of a painting. This one is, I guess you could call it realistic in a way, and yet it goes, again, it goes beyond realism a little bit, because most people don't want to paint the back of a flower. That if you look at the back of the flower, you see this beautiful arcing shapes and lines that go out. And there was this pink tulip, and I just, with my viewfinder, went through the photograph and picked this shape to paint. And I liked the motion of the painting, the fact that the center of interest is almost down in the corner, which is a big no-no, but it's not quite in the corner. And the movement of the lines coming out, how balanced the weight. And there's a thing in paintings that I call visual weight, W-E-I-G-H-T. And the trick is to balance visual weight. If you have a piece of black paper and you put a great big dark green shade and a little bitty white shade, who's going to be the strongest? That little bitty white shade. Because the dark green, even though it's big, blends into the background. You don't notice it as much. So this one was based on a couple of the roses. It's like two blossoms, and I called it Conversation because it's basically two colors. Most of my paintings, you'll notice, have a limited palette, 2 to 3 colors at most. Not out of any particular decision to only use that number of colors, but just because that's what seems to work. And you notice there are blue places within the pink, there are pink places within the blue, so hopefully they balance. Balance, a feeling of balance is very important, visual balance. It's a hard characteristic to put into words, it's more of a feeling or a sense. Yeah, it's like when you look at a picture on the wall, if it's a little bit crooked, you sense that. You can see that it's a little bit crooked, and I want to get straight. But so much of the design is it's all a personal sense, you know. I took a class once, it was in pastel, not watercolor, but the instructor gave us each a printout of a color photograph. And she said, oh, everybody's going to paint this. And we're all sitting there, and you were all paint the same thing. Paint it, find something there and paint it. Well, at the end of class, we had to put them up. the paintings were so different, you wouldn't have known they came from the same source. So it all goes to show that that viewfinder can be an invaluable assistant to you as an artist. All right, and this, this was based on amaryllis. And again, in this one, you can see how it concentrates the light in a certain area and the values change as well as the colors as you work outward. But that white becomes your center of interest, the only white there, and therefore it becomes the center of interest. Hopefully the lines of movement, the shapes, the balance help the eye understand the center of interest within the whole. And you can't have a center of interest all over the place. That becomes what I call visually exhausting. And I'll go back to one thing before I'm done as artists that can be useful. There was an artist named Bob Wade who was from Australia, I believe. I think he was from Australia. And he was a world-class instructor. And one of the things that he always told his students to do was to ask, what if? What if? I wrote it on a big piece of paper and I have it right over my painting table in the studio. What if I made this green? What if I made contrasts along this line? What if I don't add any, what if I do it all in one color? What if? What if I put it here? What if I put it there? What if I overlapped? What if? And it opens the door of your creativity, your mind, to allow you to think beyond what's there in your resource, or what's there when you're looking at it. If you're playing or painting, you look and see the scene. What if I leave that out? What if I put in two of those? You know, what if? Okay, thank you. We'll turn this over to Mary.
But I decided to focus my comments on art and growth. I think for me, growth is a really important topic. As I get older, it just keeps me moving forward, to feel like I'm growing and exploring and learning. And I also think that we are, as artists, and I know there are a number of artists in this audience, we are who our art is the sum of who we are, and all our experiences and all our passions and tragedies and determination, vision, and whatever, it all goes into who we are and comes out in our artwork. So I thought what I'd talk about today are three big influences on me as an artist, and then a little bit how those come to play in lyrical moments in my work in this exhibit. So the three influences I thought I'd touch on today are, first of all, Martha, who really was a big help in my development, teaching, and I see some faces whom I have had the pleasure of working with in workshops, but teaching I have found has been a huge impact on my artistic growth. And then a recent project called Musical Canvas, which has kind of predominated in my life for the last 3 years, and I think has actually added a lot to my artistic understanding and personal expression. So first of all, so Martha, now these are images from my notebook from being instructed by Martha. In 2010, I found my notebook, Martha.
Oh,
yeah, 2010. And I've done art my whole life, since I was a little kid. But I really didn't work professionally as an artist until about 2013 when I retired from IBM as an executive speechwriter of all things. So I had always taken workshops. I explored all the resources in the Utica area and Old Forge at View. Art Center in Old Forge, which isn't so far from my house, and I had gotten to a point where I felt like I needed something more. And I knew Martha's work, and I knew she had been a teacher. I sent her an email and I said, Martha, would you take me on as a student? And she said, if you work hard. She was a school teacher. So I went to her studio, I think it was like 2 hours a week for the summer and a fall, I think. It was quite a while. And I think Martha really helped me fill out some of the discipline and foundational knowledge that I never had really an opportunity to study formally. So I figured working with Martha was about the equivalent of a year of study in a fine arts school. So that was a big deal. Teaching, I mentioned, was also a very big deal. When I first retired, I still felt like a newbie in art, but through a long story, I was invited to go to Denver and film these Craftsy Corporation classes, teaching watercolor, which I felt I was nowhere near ready and prepared and had the background to do that. But what teaching has done for me, starting with that experience, has been I do tremendous research, study, practice, thinking about how to communicate. Since my background, my professional life was a communicator, how do I help people understand how to do this better and how to learn this? So I think it really did have a tremendous effect on me to teach people and to learn from them. And just an aside, I find that when I teach, you can give people the exact same directions. They're listening to all of the same words that you utter and things that you draw, and yet every individual in that class is going to come out with a totally different kind of image. And it's fascinating. It just goes to the thought of, our art is kind of who we are. Now, I'll show you a couple. These are pieces that I've done a little while back. So this is a still life, and you can see there's a lot of detail, a lot of realism in terms of color, light, shadows, and so forth. So this, I don't remember quite how many years ago, but that was sort of epic. This one, I think, was probably also maybe 8-10 years ago, and this is in the exhibit. The first one I showed you was not, but this is part of the exhibit, and it's part of a series I called Claire's Red Table. And again, this is an oil painting, but you can see there's a focus on realistic communication of this still life. This next one is courtesy of Alan Hyde and Brian Hergel, who are here. It's their painting, and this is another from the series Claire's Red Table. And you can see the cherries and the plate are realistic. The flower is getting a little looser, but the composition is beginning to change a little bit, right? It's not a standard still life. So those were earlier pieces. Now I'll move to the influence of the musical canvas. So this image was the first performance. My friend Tina Talia, who's the pianist here, and Tina had taken a watercolor workshop with me, and at one point we were just gabbing about what is the same, what's different between music and art. And I play the piano too, so she was learning art. So, we had a lot of comparisons there, and we just figured it'd be kind of interesting to do something together, to collaborate on a live performance. So we did, and we've done about 5 of them now. And you can see I'm down in the corner there painting while Tina played. So it was live, painting live to Tina's live music. I'm going to show you another quote, and I thought this was appropriate because it talks about a painter that gets satisfaction from mere representative painting is kind of missing an expression of their inner life. I think Kandinsky, who was a musician and an artist, really looked to music as a more perfect expression of of art. But I think I did learn a lot from music in terms of listening to and learning form to the pieces Tina played, the kind of sounds, if you tried to visualize the sounds, like a bowing of a violin, it would translate to maybe curved, smooth lines. Percussive piano playing would create a totally different kind of image. So there was a lot of back and forth with Tina and I between music and art, and it was very informative to me and very enjoyable. Now this was painted live at one of the musical canvas performances. So you can see that now there's a little bit of a difference between those realistic paintings and this one. It's a little bit looser, more flowy, and some of it has to do with simply the time I had to paint it. But also I think the sense of the music influencing that painting. The other aspect of the musical canvas that was really a big deal for me was we focused on themes. So we had one theme early on was on a bird sanctuary in the town of Trenton, near where I live. And the music and the art all related to that. The second theme we did was water, particularly the regional waters of upstate New York. And I'm going to show you these in a sequence that shows you kind of like Martha did, where we're moving from super realistic to more interpretive and a little more impressionistic, and then even towards the abstract. This one was in a previous exhibition of my water paintings at View Art Center. But you can see it's fairly realistic, but it has a sort of romanticism to it or whatever. This is another one, and again, following this theme of water. I was also very interested in looking at water from all different perspectives. So a couple of these, this one, for example, was taken, it's from a painting that I took from a kayak. So I wanted to capture that feeling of going from this one lake through this channel into a second lake, and it was just like a magical reality that I was trying to capture with this one. And again, this one was done from another perspective, which was holding the camera down right by the water when I was in a kayak. So now the perspectives and the sort of subjects, I think, began to migrate a little bit. And here is a fall scene looking down on the water with the clouds reflecting and the leaves floating on it. So you can see now they're getting less and less like a traditional landscape. Okay. And I've seen other artists, as they develop or as they grow, change in a similar way, where we go from super realistic, interpretive, and then really look at shapes and colors kind of differently, and that pushes us sometimes more towards the abstract. And then this one's looking straight down, and it was looking down at rocks and water, and I was really interested in the contrast of texture between the water and the rock, and the hardness of the rock, and then with the splattering of bright colors. But again, this is sort of approaching more of an abstract kind of landscape than what we saw in the beginning. And this one, I think you can sort of see the influence of music, right? Here are the swirling lines, and so I think that whole experience made me more sensitive to thinking about things in different ways, to looking at shapes and thinking about how sounds would appear on paper. So it was a very sort of dramatic growth for me. This is another Kandinsky one, but I think this quote is good for an artist as well as for a viewer. And it's, lend your ears to music, open your eyes to painting, and stop thinking. Just ask yourself whether the work has enabled you to walk about in a hitherto unknown world. If the answer is yes, what more do you want?